Welcome to another episode of Finding the Good, where we are sharing God's goodness in the lives of His people, one story at a time. And today I have my friend Victoria here, who is going to be sharing an incredible story. But before we jump into that, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Victoria. I am 24 years old. I live here in San Antonio, Texas, and I work for UTSA. A little bit more about my background with walking with the Lord. I practically grew up in the church ever since I was a little baby, and so just been walking with the Lord ever since then and just serving God's community.
Yeah, that's actually, me and Vicky met here at church, and we went to lunch. I think it was lunch at Panera or dinner, and got to know each other and found out that we have a whole bunch of things in common, and so really, really love this girl. So today she is going to be talking about a difficult season she walked through a few years ago when her father passed, and so can you just tell us about the person your dad was and the relationship you had with him?
Yeah, so me and my dad had a rather unique relationship where we weren't necessarily super close, but we were very similar in our personality type. Very quiet, laid back until, the right person brings it out of you.
Yeah.
My dad was very, very silent most of the time, but whenever he did speak, it was very powerful and very impactful. My dad was dedicated to serving the church his entire life. He always taught me how to tithe and, always put forth all of your efforts towards, building up God's kingdom. So he kind of instilled that in me. He was a great musician. He was a piano player. He was also an organist.
What year did your father pass away?
It was in late October of 2017.
Okay, and so was it something you guys were expecting, or was it kind of all of a sudden?
So his actual passing was sudden. However, we did know that he was sick. It turns out it was a terminal illness, but we didn't know exactly how long that was going to take.
Sure.
He knew, but we didn't know. And so it was kind of sudden, but at the same time it was expected a little bit.
Okay. You saying that he knew, was he just trying to protect, I guess, the family?
I would say so, which I understand. We were all going through different seasons of life. It was kind of like an empty nest at our house, and so I can understand why he did it, and so I wasn't really upset about it. But I think it was probably for our protection, and just because he didn't want us to kind of stress ourselves out in that season.
Yeah, and so back in 2017, your father passing, I think you shared with me that that season was even more difficult because you were going through other things. So can you share what other things you were struggling with during that time?
Sure. Yeah. So there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
2017, I had graduated from Texas State in May, and so I just graduated. Going out into the real world. I was only 20 too, so only being 20, not really knowing how to be an adult. I was looking for a job, and that was just really stressful. So I kind of had a little bit of post-grad depression during that time, even though I didn't know it. And so going through that, I also was in a relationship with my then boyfriend, and that was my first love. And so everything was going great up until around September, October, and we unfortunately broke up. And of course, the first love breakups, those are probably going to be the hardest.
Yeah.
And I've been through other breakups before, but that one was definitely the most painful that I've experienced. And so walking through a breakup, going through post-grad depression. I also had a lot of health issues as well. Me and you have talked about my thyroid.
Yeah.
I have thyroid disease, and so for me, after graduating college, I wasn't eating as much as I did because I didn't have that much access to fast food. And so I lost a ton of weight, and I'm already really small, and so it was a bit concerning. To the point to where whenever I was I had a previous church, but whenever I was going to that church, I had to pin up my clothes because I lost that much weight and nothing was fitting me anymore. And so there was one day that someone called me out on it. They didn't call me out, but they just kind of said hey, this isn't okay, this isn't normal. I was also lashing out at people a lot. if you don't know what the thyroid does, it pretty much controls all of your hormones. And so...
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think I've ever seen you angry before.
Yeah, so you haven't seen me angry, but it really affected the people that I was closest to. So it was just a whole bunch of different things that were happening up until October when, obviously my father passed.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And so when your father passed and all of those things were happening, how did you feel? Was that almost like, I know sometimes people go through things and it's like, oh wow, this is like the thing that kind of broke the camel's back. So like, can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would probably say that was the thing that I kind of came to the end myself, because all of these other things were going on and I was trying to handle it within my own hands, and obviously that
never works.
It never works.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the very thing, and as sad as it was for the passing, it's exactly what I needed in that season for me to realize, like, okay, I can't do this myself moving forward.
That's really good. And so with all of that going on, your father passing, I think anyone who's probably not walking with the Lord, and even if you are, those can be seasons where you're really, really broken. But walking through that, looking back now, what was the good that kind of came out of it?
So I would say, I'll kind of go back and explain like everything that led up to that very moment. And so whenever, after I had gotten, like, we went through a breakup and I was heartbroken, I was pretty lonely because I didn't really have friends. I was here in San Antonio, but I didn't really have friends outside of my church. And so I essentially was just kind of to the place of like just burying myself in the loneliness and in that depression. And so my sister, who was living in Houston, which she currently is right now, she told me, she was like, you need to get out of the house, or you need to get out of San Antonio, like come hang out with me, like get around someone that you know. And so I said, okay, like I was hesitant. I was like, I don't feel like it, but I probably should. Me and my sister, we hung out with some of her friends. It was a good night. And the next morning around 5 a.m., that's whenever we received a phone call. And immediately when I received it, I started praying. I was like, because we didn't know if he was actually dead or not. And so I started praying. I was like, God, like, please, whatever it is that you need to do, like, would you just do it in him? Would you just heal his body? And then we received that confirmation a couple of minutes later. And of course, I broke down crying. Me and my sister, we were hugging, just pouring our eyes out. And shortly after that, like, something kind of switched for me, I guess you could say. And so we packed up our stuff, which thank God I was in Houston with her, because I can't imagine me being out by myself in San Antonio and her being alone in Houston. So I know that was God ordained, because he brought us together for that. And so we packed up the car, headed straight to Houston, and in the car we were listening to a lot of worship music, a lot of Israel Houghton, which is my favorite worship artist.
He's great.
And that's whenever I experienced just an overwhelming peace that I've never experienced before. And yes, this was tragic. This is very sad and very fresh. It was only a couple of hours, but I felt, in a way, I kind of felt joy for my father, because I knew that he had battled so many different diseases, so many different illnesses in his life, and I was so happy for him, like, to know that he was with Jesus in that moment. From the morning to that afternoon, it was a totally different person. Like, I had such an overwhelming peace that I really can't even explain it right now. But I know that it was from the peace of God. And so, I mean, it was the peace of God. Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of how that day went through. But as far as the good to come from that season, aside from experiencing God's peace for the first time, I would say this actually helped me to grow in relationship with my family as well. We weren't too close before, and this really helped us to, get to know each other a little bit more, have those deeper conversations. I even got to get close to my dad's side of the family with my half-brothers. I hadn't seen them in like 15 years, hadn't talked to them. And they all came down from Ohio and from St. Louis, and, we all got to like talk and hang out and have a good time. So that was really a good blessing from that season, especially because this was 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and my dad had bought us all tickets to go to Cincinnati to see his family. Wow. And so we still decided to go to honor that, and it was now we still talk on a weekly basis. Another great thing to come from this is just me being able to find Grace Avenue. I was looking for another church at the time, and thankfully I lived right across the street. And so I just went and visited Grace Avenue, and with everything that was going on, that first day, you get that Connect card or that prayer card.
Yeah.
I wrote down like everything, like I filled it from top to bottom. I nearly ran out of space, and I took it to the Next Steps team, and someone prayed for me on the spot. And that was my confirmation. I said, like, this is where I need to be. And so that was really all the good that came from it. It's just growing in relationships, not only with Jesus, but also with the people around me, and growing in God's community.
Man, that is so good. So good. Man, any situation that seems kind of hopeless, God is always working behind the scenes, even like when we don't see it right away. Yeah. So my last question for you is, anyone who might be watching who's walking through a difficult season, and maybe, I know there's been times we talk about we want to take our situations in our control. We want to do things our way, and it just never works out. And so in order to receive that peace, we have to surrender fully to God. So can you kind of just speak into anyone who might be watching, going through a hopeless situation, and they're wanting that supernatural peace?
Yes. So the first thing I would say is that it's really hard to receive if your hands are already full. Yeah. And so a lot of the times I was going through the whole range of emotions. Like, there are really good days, and then there are really low days, low weeks even, where I was experiencing those negative emotions like sadness, grief, anger, bitterness, so on and so forth. And ultimately I had to learn, okay, I can't even handle these emotions myself. Like, there's so much going on, and I was drowning in my sadness and in my sorrow. And so I had to learn how to surrender that over to God whenever I was experiencing that. And so, for instance, I kind of relate it to something I did earlier this morning. So I had a whole bunch of clothes all around the apartment. And I said, you know what, I don't feel like dealing with this right now. And so I just threw it all into the closet on the floor. Yeah. And I know that later on, I'm going to have to open up that closet again, and then, like, there the clothes are. Okay, so now I actually have to deal with this. And so I kind of thought of that for my emotions. Like, you either have the option to try and hide it and sweep it under the rug, or you can surrender to God fully in that moment. And the surrendering wasn't necessarily for me to feel better in that moment. It was more so recognizing God's authority over me and entirely, over my emotions, over my feelings, over this entire grieving process. And so just recognizing who God was in my life, thinking of the faithfulness, his faithfulness, and the things he's done in my past, the situations he's brought me from. And so I just know that God is good even in these big storms, storms of life. And so that's really what I had to put my focus on.
So good. So good. Well, thank you so much, Vicky, for being on Finding the Good. Thank you. And for everyone watching, thank you so much. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to end it. I'm just like blown away by everything you said. It was so incredibly good. I love you so much, and I know God has amazing things in store. I really didn't know where to go with it. I was like, man, everything is so good that she's saying.